Welcome to Your County on Community 7 Television. I'm Veis and I'm your host. Every month we look at a different aspect of what's going on in Yellowstone County. This month we're very excited to have Justice of the Peace, Jeannie Walker, with us. Jeannie, thanks so much for coming down to visit with us.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right. So we're going to talk about kind of what's been going on in your courtroom the last few months, which I'm sure is something nobody was expecting or experiencing. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit. You serve in the Justice Court. What is Justice Court and how does it fit in with Yellowstone County and the Yellowstone County government?
Absolutely. So Justice Court is a court of limited jurisdiction. We're actually provided for in statute. Statute says that there shall be a Justice Court in each county. We handle all misdemeanor offenses committed in Yellowstone County, anything from a speeding ticket to a DUI to an assault. We also have a pretty robust civil division. We handle small claims such as default on a money loan to something more complicated like breach of contract with respect to construction job. We also handle orders of protection as well. We typically see around 10,000 filings a year criminal and about 5,000 for civil, but those numbers are going up and they will continue to go up.
Sure. Compare and contrast with district court. What is district court and how do you guys relate to district court?
So district court, in terms of the criminal component, they would handle mostly felonies, so your more serious offenses, homicides, robberies, things of that nature. Also, with respect to the civil division, parenting plans, divorces, controversies where there's more than $12,000 in dispute. Maybe you've got a large railroad case or medical malpractice, something along those lines. That's what they would handle. But we work in conjunction with them, and we do have concurrent jurisdiction on some matters.
Okay. And what about like the City of Billings Court? Compare and contrast Justice Court with the City of Billings Court.
So Justice Court would be more akin to Billings Municipal Court, both a court of limited jurisdiction, but Billings Municipal Court handles all citations, offenses committed in the city limits of Billings. They also do some civil matters as well in orders of protection.
Okay. Does stuff get passed back and forth between your guys' courts, or it's pretty clear when it comes through the door, hey, that needs to go to city court and this needs to come here?
No, it's clear because of jurisdiction.
Okay.
So if an officer is going to cite somebody, they're cited into either Justice Court or City Court. So if somebody's pulled over outside of city limits, but they're in Yellowstone County, they would be cited into Justice Court. Okay. If they're pulled over in city limits, they would be cited into municipal court.
And I'm assuming it's the geographic line that matters, right? It doesn't matter the peace officer that necessarily writes that ticket, i.e. a sheriff can write a ticket in the city of Billings, and can a police officer write a ticket in Yellowstone County outside of city limits?
Well, that gets a little bit more complicated, but the short answer is yes, it's basically within the jurisdictional boundaries. Okay. So you're either in the city limits or you're outside of the city limits.
Okay. All right. Very good. So let's go back a few months and talk a little bit about how the court has been impacted by COVID-19 and what did you guys how you handled it. When did I guess I'm making an assumption here. So if my assumption is wrong, please correct me. Is it up to you and Justice Carter to kind of direct that? Here's what's going to happen in the courtroom, here's what's going to happen with the jury, here's what's going to happen with lawyers, or do you have to do that in conjunction with other personnel to say these are the procedures that we're going to use during COVID times?
That's a great question. It's a complicated question because there's a lot of moving pieces. So ultimately, because we're a court, we're answerable to the Montana Supreme Court. The Office of the Court Administrator, they are the ones who direct us in terms of how we handle procedure, things of that nature. But at the same time, as you know, we're located in a county building. Okay, so we also have rules that are set forth by the commissioners. The clerks are actually employed by the county as well. So there's just a lot of different moving pieces. Judge Carter and I, as being elected officials, we obviously had a lot of discretion in how we handle our court proceedings, and the Montana Supreme Court has been very liberal in allowing that. But there have been mandates that have come down in terms of COVID-19, requirements, restrictions. So as far as who makes decisions and things like that, I would say ultimately it's us, but under the guidance of the Montana Supreme Court and, of course, Governor Bullock.
Sure.
And so we've had to comply with all of those different mandates, and it's been quite challenging. But Judge Carter and I, we work really well together. We have been extremely proactive. I mean, we got on top of this in the very beginning, and I can go more into that when you're ready.
Yeah. So why don't you? I think that's kind of the next step where we'd be going. So then, given the restrictions of where you have to listen to people, how did you guys then go about implementing some of the things that needed to happen for court to continue to proceed?
Okay. So I think the easiest way to describe this is I'm going to tell you how it worked before COVID-19 and how it works now. So let's just take a criminal case. You're cited with a speeding ticket. You're given a citation. You're told you need to appear on or before a certain date in justice court. You show up, check in, we process your paperwork, goes to the judge, you come into the courtroom, either you plead guilty or not guilty, your case is processed, you go back out to the clerk's office, you get your paperwork, you're on your way. If you plead not guilty, you come back. That's typical. Civil, you come in, you file a complaint, there's an answer, we set it for trial, we have a trial, judge, jury, whatever. Now, with COVID-19, and we had to change all of those procedures, and we actually started back in March when we just had a few cases. We actually rescheduled all of our open court appearances. Those would be the appearances that you come in to appear on your traffic citation, just to reduce foot traffic. I mean, we could have 30 people that show up at any given time to appear on their traffic citation, and we just couldn't have that. So we actually scheduled those, rescheduled them out into the middle of May and June. Hence, we sort of had this delay and then a doubling up of cases that we had to deal with at that time. But as far as procedure goes now, when we did have the shelter in place, we had to completely rearrange how we conducted justice court from that's just how court works. You showed up, you came in, you saw the judge. And that's, we had to, we were still open, we were essential, we remained open, but everything had to be remote, either by telephone or by video. So we scrambled to get set up for all of that, whether it was by Zoom or Microsoft Teams, making sure that we had the ability to do court appearances by phone. We still continue to do a lot of remote appearances. When the governor lifted the shelter in place, we did start to allow more people to come into the courtroom, but we are very strict about social distancing, very strict. No more than 10 litigants in my courtroom, no more than 6 in Judge Carter's courtroom, and they literally have markings on the bench for where they are designated to sit. We have the social distancing stickers that are actually outside of the clerk's office, just so we don't have, a bottleneck, a pileup of litigants waiting to get in. We don't allow more than two litigants into the clerk's office to process paperwork and so forth. I mean, it's been a challenge. I mean, we could see up to 100 litigants a day in justice court. That's a significant amount of foot traffic.
So it sounded like, and I could have been interpreting this wrong. So if I did, it sounded like, I got my speeding ticket, and you kind of told me, and it was incumbent upon me to come to the court at the time that was specified before. Now, I got my speeding ticket, but you don't necessarily want me to show up on Wednesday at 10:30. How do you know how to get a hold of me? Or, how do you know how to get a hold of me to say, no, your time is Tuesday at 4:30 and here are your options?
Right. So they're still scheduled to appear on that particular date, Wednesday at 9 a.m. But what we're doing at this point is it's quite a bit of work. We have our clerks calling all of these litigants the week before and saying, okay, you're scheduled to be in court Wednesday at 9 a.m. This is a speeding ticket. If you like, the judge could see you by telephone rather than have you come into the courtroom. And we do encourage that as well. Certain offenses, we want you to be in the courtroom, more serious ones. But speeding ticket, something along those lines, we can handle that over the telephone. So we're doing all the work basically on the front end to try and schedule it. So it's kind of like a reservation system.
Sure.
Rather than you just showing up, we want to know, can we see you by telephone? Is there some reason that you feel you want to come down and see the judge in person, and try to make accommodations based upon that. But we're very mindful of what we have set each week. And then, of course, you have the represented litigants. For the most part, they're appearing by video, and then their client is appearing by phone. Sometimes the client does come into the courtroom and you have the attorney by video, but everybody's there, everybody can hear and see. And so, they're getting adequate representation.
Sure. Now, if I was speeding, I don't even have an issue with it. Can I just not even appear? Do I need to call in and say, hey, my fine is this amount and I'm willing to pay that because he got me?
Certain offenses, you can do that without appearing. Certain offenses, yes, a speeding ticket, you could just simply pay the fine. And then basically what happens is it turns into just a conviction.
Sure.
But if you were wanting some special
if I
disposition
say,
from the court,
Judge, I disagree with this totally. Here's my side of the story. Then I am going to have to get on the phone, right?
Right. Some sort of appearance, whether by phone or in person.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. What have been some of the more difficult accommodations that you guys have need to make? And I'm assuming that probably has to do with some of the difficult cases that might show up in your courtroom.
So, when we had the shelter in place and like I said, we were still open, just everything was remote. Some of the more serious offenses, it was difficult to try and do those remotely, whether by phone or video, just because those offenses are a little bit more involved. There might be classes associated with them, and we wanted to make sure that they were getting the correct referrals, knowing where they need to go in terms of doing their classes, things of that nature. Some offenses, there was even jail time to be imposed, and unfortunately, that just had to be delayed during that period. That was just the reality of the situation. Obviously, we're very mindful of the jail, and the number of inmates in the jail, the risk that poses, and so forth.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because I know from the beginning this was one of the big concerns that everyone associated with the county had, is a correctional facility that kind of becomes a hot spot. Let's start here. Talk to me and talk to us about what your philosophy is on when someone needs to go to jail, and maybe then how has that changed since COVID has been in place?
All right. Well, and I don't know if it's so much my philosophy, but just essentially, following the law, following the law regarding bond.
Sure.
So generally speaking, unless it's a capital offense, everybody's entitled to bond. What that bond is depends upon the circumstances of each case.
Sure.
Okay, you look at criminal history, employment, ties to the community, all those different risk factors.
Yeah.
When we had the shutdown, the shelter in place, there was a large concern about the risk it posed to the jail in terms of a positive case. And so, as I'm sure you're aware, we were really focused on reserving jail for the more serious offenses.
Right. Yeah.
So the nonviolent offenses, and it's not like we were just simply, well, we'll just see you in 2 weeks. It was, we're going to impose alternatives. Maybe we're going to impose GPS monitoring to keep track of your whereabouts. Some sort of pretrial supervision, so we, were assured that you were going to be safe in the community and make your court appearances.
Right.
But we really had to be mindful about the cases that came before us, and sort of created a hierarchy of, which cases we would treat for purposes of priority in imposing higher bonds, or knowing that these individuals would likely be incarcerated, say, over these individuals. But it was a lot of thought process, a lot of planning, a lot of meeting with all of the judges, the district court judges, Billings Municipal Court, the jail, county attorney, and everybody was on board in terms of how we were going to treat cases going forward in terms of setting bond.
All right.
So
I'm assuming, prior to this, you guys had a couple of alternatives. You touched on one where the person doesn't necessarily go to jail. They get a tracking monitor on their ankle rather than that. And I believe there's a couple maybe other alternatives out there. I'm not sure. Did you guys start to use those more often? And were there any new kind of alternatives that came up during the course of this time to say, well, we weren't using this before, but this seems like not a bad way to go?
As far as GPS, we significantly increased that, significantly, absolutely, just for purposes of community safety, keeping track of defendants while they're on release, absolutely. We've always used any alcohol-related offense, we've always used alcohol monitoring as well, which is another form of keeping track because they do have to provide a breath test twice a day, or maybe it's reporting to the jail twice a day to provide a breath test. So that gives you a layer of community supervision as well. There's always been pretrial supervision as an option. Those are probably the two main ones that we used in terms of any type of community supervision in lieu of jail. And then of course, I mean, if somebody was able to post bond, that's always an assurance as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, and I've heard, I guess I've heard stories of people who do need to do their jail time, but they're not considered significant risks, maybe going in on Saturday and Sunday and serving their time then. Was that something that was going on before, and have you guys kind of discontinued that?
Yeah, so anytime jail, in any instance where jail time is posed, you have the option to remand that person immediately right there in the courtroom.
Sure.
Meaning they have to wait, they're going to go serve their jail time immediately, or give them the option to self-report at a later date. So again, we were just mindful of those circumstances. Is this a situation where this person needs to be remanded right away because the circumstances of the offense, the risk to the community and so forth, or is this a situation where we can say continue with GPS monitoring, continue with alcohol monitoring, and then at such and such date require you to report to the jail to serve your time. Another option to house arrest.
Yes.
In lieu of jail time, where a person, it's kind of like GPS, they have an ankle monitor, but they are confined to their home for the majority of the day. So that was just another option as well.
Okay. Let's talk on another a subject that I'm sure is probably coming up a lot more, or is going to be coming up a lot more in your guys' courtroom, and that's evictions. I know there has been some federal mandates on that. Talk to us about evictions before COVID and evictions after COVID.
Okay. Evictions have always been a predominant factor in justice court. That's just where they're primarily filed. And, I mean, we just had a steady number of them that we saw just on a regular basis. I mean, we have a couple of attorneys, that's primarily how they, their area of practice, and then certain landlords and property management associations that handle them. Then you have, of course, we had both the federal moratorium on evictions and the state moratorium on evictions. The state one was implemented, I believe, March 30th, and that was a complete hold, just a complete hold. So if it was for non-payment of rent, there was a stay. No eviction could take place, okay? Something for other than non-payment of rent, like destruction of property or something like that, the eviction could proceed. Governor extended it one more time. It lifted, I want to say, May 24th. However, it still remains in effect for vulnerable individuals. Okay, they have to meet a 3-part test. So at this point, we are seeing more evictions. I think we're going to potentially see a record number of evictions at this point. However, we are very careful in the Justice Court when we are faced with an eviction based upon non-payment of rent. We always ensure that the litigant does not meet the 3-part criteria for protection. If there's any indication that that litigant meets that 3-part criteria, then the eviction is stayed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, are those type of proceedings, like an eviction proceeding, is that something that you guys are primarily doing on the phone or over the video? Is there a need for those people to be in the courtroom?
It just depends on the circumstances. We try to initially schedule them by phone, but if it just isn't feasible for whatever reason, then yes, we'll bring them into the courtroom. But so far, it's working out. I mean, as far as participation by both sides, in fact, I tend to see more litigants participate when they are given the opportunity to appear by phone and not come into the courtroom. Sure. Which is interesting. Yeah. So when we set these for a hearing, we typically get a call from tenant saying, here's my phone number, I'd like to participate. And so we give them that due process. I always ask them the questions as far as the 3 requirements and make a determination if the eviction should be stayed. Okay.
All right. Tell me something that you learned about Justice Court that you didn't know before the pandemic started.
Well, that's a great question. I have learned a ton. I know my job is primarily to the court, but I have to tell you, during this pandemic, so much of it has been spent just adapting and readapting to new procedures for COVID. But something that has just, really been remarkable is the ability of our clerks to rise to the occasion. I mean, things were changing by the hour some weeks. We would get a mandate from the Montana Supreme Court, something's coming in from the county. Of course, we've got governor's mandates, and we were just constantly changing and adapting. I mean, when we went from everybody comes to the courtroom to see the judge to nobody comes to the courtroom and everything's done by phone and video, that was a significant change. And I'm so proud of our clerks, because they really did rise to the occasion. And, they did what we asked them to do. They didn't complain. They adapted. They learned. They figured out the new procedure. Of course, you always have hiccups, but we worked through them, and then we had a good system going. And then, of course, the governor lifts the shelter in place. Yeah. Now we have to figure out, how do we safely allow litigants back into the courtroom? So then again, we had to change the procedure all over again. How can we, we have to prevent 30 people from showing up at a time, 100 people from at any, throughout the day going through the justice court. But sure. They did a remarkable job. They continue to do a remarkable job. I would say that is probably, the most beneficial thing that's happened to us is we've just learned a lot about each other and how we work together and what we're capable of.
All right. Have you been able to network or meet with other justice courts across Montana, across the nation? And I know you've talked about meeting with district courts, but outside of Yellowstone County, have you been able to network and find out, well, you're handling it this way, that's a good idea, or we're handling it this way and they say that's a good idea? Has some of that networking and discussion gone on as well? Oh,
absolutely. Yes. We actually have a listserv for all the courts of limited jurisdiction that we communicate on. I would say everybody has their own procedure, but the idea is all the same. Sure. We're all trying to limit in-court appearances and do it remotely. But, somebody, they might use, one might use Zoom, one might use Teams. One might do majority of telephone appearances. It just depends upon the county. It depends upon the resources as well. It depends upon the types of cases that they see. I mean, somebody up in the High Line not going to see the same type of cases we do here in Yellowstone County. But we all interact, we all connect on some level. Interestingly, every year, twice a year, we have to attend a training, a conference, all of us together. Sure. Yeah. So you can imagine we can't really do that during this time.
Right.
Now it's all going to be by video this year. It's all going to be by Zoom. So this will be a new learning experience for us as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. I'm assuming they're going to have some resources for conducting your court more remotely during the meeting. Or do you kind of have an idea what's on the agenda for that?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be by Zoom. We're going to have speakers who appear by Zoom. We're required to log in, show our attendance, and I don't know. This is new for all of us. This has never happened before, and they're very strict about us attending these conferences. Very strict. So, so we'll just see.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as far as court operations go, during the course of the time during the pandemic, have you seen more cases, less cases, different cases? What have you guys kind of seen over the last 6 months as what's coming through your doors now?
Well, like I said, evictions are on the rise. Just because of the moratorium, and now the landlords are seeking to evict those for non-payment of rent. Domestic violence. We're seeing more domestic violence cases. It's just a reality. It's a byproduct of the situation. We're also seeing more DUIs, but we are appropriately processing those cases. We're taking them into consideration in terms of risk to victims, community, and so forth. As far as a downturn, I guess I can't say that any particular case we're seeing less of. We're very busy. We've always been very busy, and the cases, we continue to get more filings. Each year it goes up.
Sure.
So,
what have been some of the most difficult things you've had to deal with during the course of the pandemic?
It's been a challenge just because, like I said, we're in a weird dynamic where we're answerable to the Montana Supreme Court, but we're in a county building. So we still have to follow policies of county commissioners. Of course, we have mandates from Governor Bullock. And so to be able to comply with all of those has been challenging because, not all the policies mesh. I mean, for instance, Yellowstone County, as far as any sort of remote appearances, they support Microsoft Teams. Montana Supreme Court supports Zoom. So to try and figure out which platform we need to use that best accommodates our courts and our litigants has really been a challenge. And then just the capacity, what we have in terms of equipment and budget. I mean, we were told early on by the Montana Supreme Court, we don't have the capacity to have every single clerk of every single court of limited jurisdiction working remotely. It's just not feasible. So we were always open and we always had clerks that came into the office every single day. We didn't have the luxury of working remotely. We are really at this point trying to have the equipment just to have a few people work remotely if there is a complete shutdown of Justice Court. But again, it's what platform do we need to use? We're trying to comply with both Montana Supreme Court and policy of Yellowstone County.
Sure.
So,
on the flip side of that coin, what's been some of the most uplifting things that you've dealt with during the course of the pandemic?
Again, I would go back to just my clerks and how well they've done, and because of that, they made my job easier. I didn't get pushback. I didn't get disobedience or insubordination because they didn't want to follow this new procedure that was just handed to them 5 minutes before the start of the day. That, to me, it means everything in the world. So for my job, as stressful as it's been in trying to adapt and overcome these obstacles, the fact that I have a bunch of clerks who are willing to get behind me and support whatever we need to do, because in the end they know that I have their best interest in mind. That's just, it's like I said, it's just really been remarkable. All right.
Gaze into your crystal ball a little bit. What do you see changing over the six months to a year? I usually say 3 to 5 years on this, but things are changing so fast now that I'm going to squish it down to maybe the next 6 months to the next year. Are things going to kind of stay the same where you are, or if that vaccine comes through, boom, tomorrow it goes back to the way it was before?
At this point, we are planning to do, we have continued to do since the start of this pandemic, we are going to continue to be as safe as we possibly can, social distancing, increased sanitation, and masks. We are not going to allow a situation where, we're not being careful, where we let down our guard or it becomes so relaxed that we continue to just have a significant number of people just appear in Justice Court at the same time. I mean, until we hear differently, we are going to continue to do what we are doing. And like I said, we have always been incredibly proactive about protecting our litigants. And here's the real reason for it. When you think about going to Costco, going to Walmart, going to a restaurant, that's your choice. And if you want to go and for whatever reason and assume the risk, that's your choice. But you don't necessarily have a choice to come to Justice Court. When you're given a citation and you're ordered to appear, you have to appear. So we have to make it the safest possible situation for you to come in and give you the option not to have to come in if circumstances allow that. So.
All right, Justice Walker, thank you so much for coming in, spending some time with us and talking about what has been a challenging environment, to say the least. Thank you to you and your court for all you're doing to keep everyone in Yellowstone County safe and keep the wheels of justice moving. So thank you very much.
Thank you.